Welcome to the Weekly Wars podcast, where two guys who talk about Star Wars way too much have decided to record it and let you listen. Be sure to check every Wednesday to get the latest episode. And now to Zach and Rhett.
Welcome to Weekly Wars, your weekly dose of all things Star Wars.
I'm Zach.
And I'm Rhett.
And this week we are talking about how murder is okay.
I think that's all that needs to be said. Have a good night, guys.
Take care. Good luck.
Nope. That's only a small part of what we're going to talk about.
That's just sort of our inflammatory clickbait title so that you can
yes, we're at that
to our podcast
status already. Clickbait. Star Wars murder is okay. So this was actually a topic that we've kind of been discussing. It's come up a couple of times in my personal life, talking to
the
different
Star
people.
Wars discussions you're having in your personal life.
Well, you didn't have to clarify.
I'm just throwing that out there.
No, this discussion of morality in Star Wars is kind of what we wanted to get at mostly. I have talked to a couple of people, some that are close friends and or relatives, and other people that were just like a cashier at a store, about how the morality in Star Wars works. And there's kind of this general misconception that goes around that Star Wars is just black and white morality. And I wanted to really address that in our podcast.
And we talk about this all the time. I think most of our discussions usually center around Yoda and ObiWan's decisions and how they decided to do what they did, whether it's, fighting the Clone Wars or running off and hiding for years. Like, was that really a good decision? And I don't mean good as in like logical. I mean like good versus evil, right?
Yeah, on the sliding scale of morality, is that a decision that actually benefited the most people? I guess is one way you could look at it. And I think that one way is the way that Jedi do look at it for the most part. So one of the most blatant examples, I think, of this, and to be fair, this is something that I discovered mostly through another podcast called Story Wonk, and I believe the episodes relating to Star Wars in particular were Star Wonk, maybe? Something like that. I will find the link to post below this podcast.
Yeah, we'll put it below in the description.
Because it is definitely a very interesting podcast, and it opened up a lot of doors for discussion between us. So the blatant example that I was talking about earlier, in Empire Strikes Back, Luke is given a choice, right? Luke is always lauded as the perfect, quote-unquote, good-aligned hero. He always does what's right. So they say,
quote unquote, right? Because he basically makes a series of wrong decisions through Empire. Well, quote unquote, wrong.
Right. Since it's all relative and objective and contextual, it's very difficult to exactly codify or quantify. But so his choice that he's given at the end of Empire, he has the vision of his friends suffering. Yoda says that if you go to them, you won't finish your training. And he advises him and cautions him to not follow the path of fear, because going to save his friends is giving in to fear of losing them. So I guess you could say in the Western sense of morality, what he's doing is okay, because a lot of Western morality and ideology centers around friends and family, right? You do the best that you can for friends and family.
Right, their priority. Family's priority over anything.
Right, and Han and Leia are effectively Luke's family at this point. So for him to sit back and do nothing while his friends are in danger, specifically to a Western point of view, is very quote unquote wrong. It's going to get really tiring saying that. We need to just visualize air quotes.
We're doing air
all the
quotes.
time.
Maybe on the video I'll have air quotes come up. But if you're listening to the podcast, I guess.
Too bad. Sorry. You'll just have to listen. You'll hear it in there.
But the idea that Yoda is trying to point out is there's the greater good that you should be looking out for. There's, this is the immediate. You're being selfish. You're feeding into yourself. But you need to finish your training because you need to save the galaxy. But what's super interesting about this, and this is what we were talking about, is how basically if Yoda or Obi-Wan gave you any advice, you should literally do the opposite at this point. And that's not to say that they didn't make good decisions before, but and also the Clone Wars sort of explains Yoda's perspective and point of view. And why he did what he did much better than the movies does, why he bailed on the galaxy, basically. But at the same time, you're all like, well, you guys didn't see it coming. You didn't do the right thing. You said you don't fight wars, and then you fought a war. And then you're all like, no, Luke, don't go save your friends. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Well, and it is, again, even Yoda and Obi-Wan's decisions occupy a very gray area. Because if they had gone through with some of the decisions that people think they should have, they would have died. If they had died, there would have been no Luke to train, or no training for Luke, I should say. Luke still could have been trained. He might have survived through other means, but there would have been no training. And if they hadn't been there, and if Luke hadn't done what he did, the end would have turned out much differently, right?
And this raises questions, which we aren't going to cover tonight, but it's sort of like, did it matter anyways?
Right.
Because now we have episode 7, and
what all has changed
right,
since then. They had like a couple decades of peace, possibly at the least.
Until the First Order was like, now we're going to blow up all the Republic with our mega weapon.
Well, until Kylo Ren slaughtered the Jedi again.
There's that too, right?
So, anyways, the whole idea that Yoda and Obi-Wan were, I think where they were coming from with a lot of this is this greater overall look at the galaxy. To Yoda, like Zach was saying before, with Luke running off to save his friends, that's an immediate concern, where Yoda's looking at the long term, saying, if you finish your training, your friends may die, but you will live and you will fight Vader and you will win because you completed your training. And that, again, that is a more Eastern thing, much like all of the Jedi philosophy. It's a very Eastern approach. It's a very Zen approach, that if you are able to forego personal connections and personal feelings, you can affect the greater good. In the terms of Star Wars, the entire galaxy could rest on that decision.
So what I would like to say in sort of summary of that point before we move on is that there is black and white in the Star Wars universe, but I think the black and white is where you as a person align yourself. You're pretty much either with the good guys or with the bad guys. In the movies and in general, that's pretty much where it's at. Now, Rogue One might introduce some different elements, and that could be interesting.
Yeah, it seems like that's an area they're going for pretty hard. And especially because up until this point, the Empire is usually seen as a unified whole. The Rebels are usually seen as a unified whole in terms of the movies. With Rogue One, they seem like they're going to be introducing this very realistic aspect of defectors from either sides, right? There's going to be traitors to the Rebel Alliance, traitors to the Emperors, spies, and that's not something that you see, and I think that's what lends to the illusion of black and white morality in the original trilogy.
Well, and huge spoiler alert, skip like 10 seconds ahead. It was confirmed this week, although we had suspected that Mads Mikkelsen is playing Felicity Jones' dad.
And he's
an Imperial commander, which makes her part of the Empire defecting.
Right. And I don't know if it's been confirmed yet, but it's also thought that Mads Mikkelsen's character is the creator of the Death Star. And that's kind of why he's turned against the Empire, because he's realized, or not, sorry, I shouldn't say the creator, but he's had a good hand in engineering it, because obviously the general plans were laid down decades before, probably when he was, still young. At least if you're going by the age of the actor and the time frame that he would have lived in. But that Death Star segue does serve,
serves us well. I do want to
serves as a segue.
One other point, though, is so the characters might be delineated, but the decisions they have to make is where the gray comes in, which is what makes it so interesting usually.
Yep.
But yeah, going to the Death Star, this is where we decided on this whole topic altogether. Someone suggested we talk about this.
Thanks, Fred.
Thanks. I don't know Fred, but I know his wife. I met her once briefly. The Death Star and killing the Death Star and everyone on it. Is that okay?
Yeah. And, obviously in the movie, it is portrayed as an excellent thing, right? When the Death Star is blown up, all there is cheering. And again, something that probably contributes to the illusion of black and white morality. They beat the good guys. That's all anyone cares about. It's time to go home and hand out medals to everyone but the Wookiee. So the question being, though, there are hundreds of thousands of personnel aboard the Death Star. Some of them, and in my personal experience, you'd probably, on military installations, you're going to have at least a quarter of civilians aboard that, civilians in contractor positions. So
there's no way that was 100% military.
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, workers...
all those people would go crazy.
Yeah, and given the Empire's penchant for slavery as well.
Yeah, there was probably slaves. A lot of Wookiee slaves.
Yeah.
Poor Wookiees.
So the question of blowing up the Death Star, is it justifiable to kill hundreds of thousands of people just to stop that one machine?
Maybe we should talk a little history first, like real history, because let's look like the nuclear bomb, which this is slightly different in that they were using this massive weapon as a deterrent to more death, right?
Right.
Japan is very different militarily now than it was during World War II or even previous to World War II. Basically, Japan was a huge powerhouse, and they had control of significant parts of Asia.
Reaching
Eastern
as far
Asia.
down into the South Pacific as Guam. I mean, Guam is very far south. And so that was quite an extensive reach. All of Manchuria, good chunks of Korea as well. So
and we nuked them not just once but twice, and tons of civilians. I mean, huge civilian casualties. Yet if you're an American, that was the best thing we could have possibly done. They still argue today that that's a defensible position. Like, we still needed to do that, because if we didn't, we probably would have San Fran Tokyo, which I'm not really opposed to, because I really liked Big Hero 6. But I mean, it's theorized that they would have invaded our western shores, and they could have got halfway through American soil before we were able to stop them.
Well, and just the fact that the war could have carried on for who knows how much longer and been, that much more of a drain to economies across the globe. It's a very messy thing. No one obviously knows for certain what would have happened, but it is a huge mess. And it took a couple of gigantic, traumatic, cataclysmic events.
Yeah. Two of them.
Yeah.
And, like you said, it's sort of debatable, but America felt it was necessary, and people still argue today that it was necessary.
So when you approach it from that viewpoint, and also considering the fact that for a weapons test, okay, the very first time this weapon was deemed functional and fully operational, they blew up a completely peace-loving planet with possibly millions, if not billions. I mean, if you're even comparing it to if Alderaan was anything like Earth, it possibly had billions of people.
Billions of people.
And at the least, it had hundreds of millions of people living there. And it was blown up.
The majority
just
of which
for a
would be
test.
innocent. Yeah, just...
Right. And Leia even says that they have no weapons, right? I mean, whatever that means exactly. And as far as the movie goes, not going into other things, but they might not have even had like a standing military, as just based on what Leia said. They
just
completely
murdered a planet of
defenseless.
innocent people.
Yes.
And it's not the only one that they were going to do. Now, Tarkin did say they were going to use the Death Star for fear. And the other side of this is there's something to be said. If they're having a military problem, if they're having a rebellion, and blowing up one planet out of hundreds could quell that, could it be worth it?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at the numbers game from the Empire's point of view, blowing up a few 100 million or a couple billion people to prevent a galaxy-wide conflict from carrying on for who knows how long, right? I mean, that could be an indeterminable amount of casualties prevented from the Empire's point of
point of view, if that
from
was
a
their
certain
intention.
point
From
of
a
view.
certain, and I think the rebellion side is they shouldn't even have this power. It's too powerful. We need to destroy it. This should not exist, because if they decide they don't like a planet, they'll just take it out. And at a certain point, if everyone kept rebelling, there wouldn't really be an empire left.
Kind of lose
is
the whole
sort of
empire if they are.
Which is
fighting
actually
back.
interesting about The Force Awakens and the Starkiller base. Their goal was not to take over the Republic. It was, we're going to blow them away.
Right. They're weak.
This is revenge. We don't want them to exist anymore.
Weak and corrupt, and they're going to die.
Yeah. So that's sort of a different attitude. And of course, those are extremists, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is you do have to kind of consider the perspective, because if, and not to get too political or pick sides here, but if ISIS was to nuke the United States, they would have huge celebrations. That would be a massive accomplishment for them, and they would be just as excited as the rebels, right? Because we're the great, over here in America, it's the great evil American empire that's taking away and destroying their way of life and everything.
Right. From a certain point of view, they are the good guys.
Whereas over here, it would be absolutely devastating, and we'd probably try and rally the entire world against them, because they're terrorists. They're just trying to cause fear. And I honestly think the Empire saw the rebels as terrorists.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And
Rebels actually addresses that poignantly at some points. They even
that's right. They have protests of the war, and they have people and terrorists
and
bombings.
And they also even show some of the civilian populations who are against the rebel activity because it disrupts the status quo. And then, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen the first season of Rebels, they blow up, or the Empire frames the main characters of Rebels for blowing up and assassinating the assistant governor of a planet. The Empire set it up. They're the ones who set off the bombs, but they made the rebels look like they did it. And so then they are essentially labeled a terrorist organization at that point. So, obviously this is the entirety of the Star Wars stories are told from the perspective of these good guys that are fighting an underdog story.
From R2-D2's perspective, according to George Lucas.
Right. From the narratives... From the narrator, R2-D2's perspective.
The narrator, R2-D2.
So from that angle, that is what Star Wars is written from, right? That's the side we're supposed to side with. And in that case, if that is the morality that we're taking a look at, blowing up the Death Star is basically just by sheer number crunching is like a drop in the water to the potential damage, or a drop of water in the bucket.
It could do.
Yeah, I mean, Alderaan, even just Alderaan to the Death Star, the ratio of people killed is pretty crazy. And that's not even accounting for all the other star systems, all the other battle groups.
Well, and of course, we know for a fact it's not the only one. I mean, if they had just blown up Alderaan as an example and went on, like we were talking about earlier, yeah, fine. But it wasn't. They were immediately going to blow up another planet.
Yeah. We don't know the population of Dantooine or anything, but they were going to go blow it up regardless, even though it wasn't a military target.
Because there was one military base on the whole planet.
Right.
They
One
were getting into range to blow up the whole planet.
Yeah. So it is, again, not completely black and white. Sometimes it may seem like it's presented that way. But again, I think there's this.
How important is freedom?
Right. Well, and if you go to listen to the Story Wonk, podcast episodes about this. This is one of the things that they address as well. This idea that harmony is a whole part of the story of Star Wars. And you can't live in harmony when there's tyranny present. So objectively, removing the tyranny brings harmony and balance. And that's represented by the destruction of the Death Star.
And also the Jedi. Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. What a twist.
But also, too, the Empire then goes to build a second Death Star.
Right.
And at that point, it's like, okay, you guys are just going to murder everyone.
Yeah, well, so if you are, if you are a civilian contractor who's contracted to work on the first Death Star, I'm sure at first they had no idea what was going on. The minute that
Alderaan they probably
blew
had
up,
it all sectioned out too, right? So yeah, you have no idea.
Yeah, like you have a dude that's just a riveter. All he does is rivets, and that was his contract, right? So the minute that they fired it, though, I'm sure they realized what was going on. So when they're building the second Death Star, every single person that worked on that knew what it was for.
They knew what was going on.
There's no way. I mean, and however you want to address that issue, or however the creative minds behind the new Star Wars Expanded Universe want to address that issue of who they hired, where they were hired from to build the second Death Star. That's whatever. Everyone knew what it was going into it. Like, you can't have anything of that size. People would be like, oh, hey, yeah, we just did this like 7 years ago. They had this many workers too. Oh, I know what we're building. Ah, crap.
This giant station that's protected by a moon?
Right.
A shield generator jet-powered by this moon?
So when the second Death Star is blown up, I mean, that's it's kind of just asking for it from the Empire at that point, and anyone that worked on it.
And fortunately, it was still in construction, so there may have been some civilians, but there probably weren't tons of manned civilians. And they prioritized the weapons aspect of the Death Star too, before everything else. So there weren't as many people killed on the second Death Star, but I guess the issue with this, as with talking about real life history, is it's preventative, and so how can you say it's hard to compare the actual people who were killed in the attempt to prevent further damage with how many would have actually been killed, because one number is objective, it exists, the other number is opinion,
hypothetical, theoretical,
right? So it's really hard to say, well, if the Death Star had stuck around, everyone would have gotten in line and they would have stopped and they wouldn't have had to blow up planets.
Right.
But how many of those planets would they have had to have destroyed up to that point? How many people would they have killed versus how many the rebels saved by blowing it up?
How trigger happy was the Emperor at that point? He's been fighting a war. He's been fighting the Galactic Civil War for, close to a decade at that point. If not over a decade, if you're including the time frame of the Rebels TV series. So at that point, he could have been as trigger happy as anyone to just go out and start blowing up any
let's just
dissentious system.
Let's just take care of this mess now.
Right. Just coal it down to the systems that are already in line. Then no one will get out of line because we just obliterated half the galaxy.
So, and then again, freedom. How important is freedom? Is it, if you kill 10 million people, but it frees your nation, is it worth it? I don't know.
Who knows? We're not here to answer that question.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about Braveheart.
Wait, the movie or like the real thing? There's a big difference.
The movie,
Okay.
of course.
Wow, what a nerd.
Wow. We are movie people. Gosh.
But yes, so it's again, it's kind of a relative thing, and especially because it also approaches that idea of I don't know what you want to call it. I guess like the dichotomy between security and freedom, or safety and freedom, because it is definitely possible, probable, and even potentially implied that the Empire brought a large amount of stability and security to most of the galaxy, but at the expense of the personal
not
freedoms.
freedom. Exactly. Personal freedom. That's what I'm saying.
And that personal freedom is harmony, right? Harmony with oneself, harmony with one's environment, and that is what the Force is all about. But that does bring us into the Jedi philosophy as well, and ways that, it's, again, it's always presented as kind of this ideal philosophy. It's a good ideology in terms of like the prequels. When you see it through the lens of Obi-Wan and Yoda and Mace Windu, it's like, no, this is what we should do. But it's not really, right? I mean, that's not the philosophy that lives through necessarily. There are certain aspects of it that Luke carries on into the end of Return of the Jedi. But overall, it doesn't make the cut, right? So,
well,
I don't know.
I mean, you're talking about they like to pretend that they're good guys, but they're very much hypocrites.
Yeah.
And so they're trying to do the right thing, but they don't even follow their own philosophy in accomplishing it. It's like the Jedi Ideal is just that, an ideal, but they aren't able to live up to it. And they don't realize it, which is very interesting from a certain standpoint. And when you look at the prequels through that lens, you get what George Lucas was trying to do. It's just he didn't really do it very well.
Right. It's not executed as well as it should have been. But
I mean, they say we can't fight a war for you. Episode 2, they say Qui-Gon says that in Episode 1, which is amusing because he's supposed to be the gray Jedi, the one that's sort of the in-between, and he's saying we can't fight a war for you. But then in Episode 2, of course, Qui-Gon's gone, and the ones who aren't supposed to be the gray Jedi are all like, oh yeah, we're going to totally fight this war for you. I mean, we're going to lead it. We'll lead the clones. We'll have generals. We're going to fight this war for you guys. And you're just like, wait, what? What happened? You also have Yoda, the realization that they're losing their power and they think it's all external, but what they don't realize is that it's internal. The Jedi are becoming arrogant. They trust in their own powers. They depend too much on their fighting skills with a lightsaber.
aggressive negotiations.
No,
but that is one of the more intense parts of the 6th season of Clone Wars. One of the final sets of episodes is all about Yoda going on this extremely spiritual and metaphysical journey through places potent in the Force, and he comes to that realization at the end that it is an internal thing, and I think that is where he begins formulating his plan that he later enacts of retreating to Dagobah, because he's realized that, the rot's in the tree at that point.
It's not just this external force, yeah. It's built in.
So yeah, but he does still hold on to this idea of the objective overall view of things, and that's what him and Obi-Wan both try to bring to Luke in A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. That's what they keep preaching to him, and He listens, or he doesn't listen so well at first, but in the end, it did work out for a time, at least.
So this is what's going to be interesting, because in the old expanded universe, Luke Skywalker was building a Jedi Order that was very different than the old Jedi Order. It was anyone who's a Force sensitive of any level is welcome to come, and will take you where you're at and develop you and help you learn about yourself. And you could get married, you could, they went out and helped people, but it was very much this is not about us controlling everything. We're just trying to be helpful. Now, they did end up taking a much larger role when the Uzan Vong invaded, and that's sort of its own thing. But, so in this new universe, though, how was Luke approaching rebuilding the Jedi Order? It didn't work.
That's what I want to know.
Right, yeah. and I'm sure they're going to release a book called Luke's Jedi Order, the New Jedi Order, or
the Jedi Order,
the
Take
fall,
2.
The fall of the New Jedi Order, because obviously it's going to have Ben Solo, in that whole scenario, right? Or maybe it'll be a trilogy of books. But, did Luke learn from them, and what's he going to do different? Or is it that he tried to mimic him?
And that's why it's failed.
And that's why it failed again. And so now, when you get to episode 7, he's going to try and...
Episode 8.
Oh, sorry, episode 7, where they reconnect. But yeah, episode 8, how's he going to approach it?
Yeah, what's he going to do to train Rey? Is he going to try and, I don't know, utilize more ancient Jedi teachings? And I think this is actually a very interesting aspect, because you do have this difference between the old Jedi Code and the new Jedi Code as presented in the prequels, and the old Jedi Code coming from some of the old the legends. So the biggest difference is that the old Jedi Code said, all of its lines to the effect of there is emotion yet peace, right? Or emotion yet peace. Sorry, that's the exact wording. Emotion yet peace. And then the new Jedi Code changed that to there is no emotion yet peace. So as of right now, that's not necessarily.
There is no emotion, there is peace.
Yeah, what you said, obviously. Yes, so there is no emotion, there is peace. So that, I think, shows a very obvious transition of the Jedi, right? They started off as having emotions but controlling them, to trying to completely remove the human side of them. And so this isn't something that has been directly approached with everything after the reset button was hit. And it's possible that maybe that's what Luke is discovering. He's finding out about something. They might not ever say it exactly inside the frame of the film, but it might make its way into the way that Luke approaches his training with Rey. If he comes in and is trying to show that it's good for her to be a person still and have emotions and feel compassion. I mean, compassion was allowed by the old Jedi Order, but love and passion and things like that are allowed, but they're not supposed to rule your actions. I think that would be awesome. Personally, I would love that.
It would be
ideal.
Interesting for them to actually delve into that, because they talk about the Jedi Code in the movies, but they never give it to you. And some of the things they say about the Jedi Code, you're all like, well, the Jedi Code I know from the expanded universe doesn't say anything about that. Like, yeah. It's super simple. It's those few lines. And then they're all like, well, yeah, the Jedi Code says this. And you're all like, what? Yeah. I guess your interpretation of that partial sentence could mean that, but
yeah, the prequels always seem to refer to it as if it were some greater body of text,
like
that you're never
handbook.
Ever given anywhere, even in the legends,
right? Which
is frustrating to people like me.
So it would be cool if they sort of addressed that. Even if they only addressed it in the books, I'd be happier if they did a little more with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I am looking forward to it. So, the big question now is, where is the discussion of Star Wars morality going from here? how have J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson and Colin Trevorrow, how have they / will they change the face of morality in Star Wars?
I'm guessing it's going to be centered around Rey and Kylo Ren. I honestly think they're going to switch places for a time.
That'd be amazing.
I think it's going to be very interesting. And then I think they'll fight together against Snoke at the end of episode 9.
I think Rey's going to die.
Wow. She's a Mary Sue, Rhett. You can't kill her.
Oh, true. I take it back. Anyways, so yeah, that was our rambling dissertation on morality and how none of it makes sense.
Write this all down and submit for a PhD.
Based on this that I have said tonight, I think I get a PhD in philosophy, guys. Thank you, and you're welcome.
All right. Thanks a lot for listening. If you want to talk to us about morality in Star Wars, be sure to post on our Facebook. Like us on Facebook and follow us on YouTube if you haven't already. Share with your friends.
Yeah, because we want your friends to tell us how wrong we are too. That's what we live. We want you to tell us we're wrong. We want friends to tell us we're wrong. We want random people we don't know to tell us we're wrong.
We have a love-hate relationship with the internet. So anyways, alrighty, that's it.
And may the Force be always in your favor.
What?